The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. Sam, back again to talk about an almost complete team. How you doing?
I'm doing good. What's up, y'all? We're back after 48 hours, so if you haven't had enough of us already, then here we are again. The Suns are averaging about one transaction a day right now, I would say. Right, Mike? Is that what it is? Since the last podcast, we have done two things in 2 days, and we're going to talk about those things. But yes, to your point, 14 roster spots out of the 15 full-time roster spots, two ways don't count. 14 full-time roster spots for this team are now occupied. We have an almost entirely complete roster. I still think there's a lot that could happen and shake out in the next few weeks, regardless of how many roster spots they have available. But yeah, so far I feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's they signed two players that I would say that you and I wanted them to sign in the last few days, which is Monte Morris and Damion Lee, and we could talk about each of those respectively, but at the very least, we got to a point in the offseason for the first time, and I'm including the draft here, where they signed some shooters, like people who could actually shoot were signed onto the team. So that made me feel a little bit better because the three other additions to the team outside of Jalen Bridges, who is on a two-way, were just non-shooters so far in Dunn, Iguodaro, and Plumlee. So, this team having better defenders is smart for this team, right? They're trying to find ways to obviously make the defense better, but upgrade the total amount of turnovers, which I think somebody like Dunn helps with a lot, to speed up the offense and take some pressure off the big three to play defense. Overall, that can help the offense, but as we've talked about this offseason, I think the offense was a bigger problem than we anticipated it was going to be, and maybe even bigger than has been spoken about throughout the regular season or the offseason so far. So at the very least, I think they addressed that with Monte Morris yesterday, and then today with Damion Lee, who obviously was on the team last year but didn't play. We're expecting he's probably going to be healthy to start the season. He missed the entire season with a pretty severe injury. If he can get back to what he was 2 years ago, that's pretty helpful, especially with the loss of Eric Gordon.
It's very helpful. I'm just going to talk about him in terms of memes, I guess, but people forget Damion Lee was a bucket. That's who Damion Lee was for the Suns 2 years ago. He played the sixth most minutes on the team 2 years ago when the season in which they traded for KD. He shot 45% from deep. Technically speaking, he's one of the all-time Suns leader. He's on the all-time Suns leaderboard in best three-point shooting all time for the Suns. On a sample size of like 300 threes that he took in that season, but he shot the hell out of the ball, as did Grayson Allen last year. So having those two guys should really help. But let's not belabor the point. Monte Morris is what we're really here to talk about today, I think. And, a lot of people had their opportunity, sports radio and daily podcasts, to get their takes out about Monte Morris yesterday. We're going to talk about shooting later in the episode because I think that's important. And I think, again, there's some things the Suns can still do to address shooting on the wing, which I do still consider a problem, Mike. But we can all agree, I think, that the thing that frustrated us the most about the offense last year was actually not even the three-point problem, which I had a huge issue with the three-point volume problem, and I know you did too, but I brought it up a million times. But the most frustrating thing were turnovers. And the fact that this team did not have a single, I wouldn't even say traditional point guard, just like not a single real point guard on the roster, and that they could not consistently develop a half-court offensive attack that made sense without turning the ball over, and that their defense was looking a lot worse as a result, right? Because we also saw at a certain point in the season, Frank Vogel, this defensive coach, had successfully assembled a half-court defense that was pretty successful, especially given the tools that he had. but that they were just turning the ball over so much, and that transition defense was dragging the team down. It was dragging their defensive rating down. It was dragging their offensive numbers down. It was something that had to be addressed. Monte Morris comes in, and he is without a doubt one of the best, if not the best, but at least one of the best guys that the Suns could have signed to address this particular problem. So how do you feel about Monte Morris in the context of table-setting, traditional point guard who can allow them to ease the turnover burden?
So we're back to the point guard conversation that we've been having for over a year, right? And I've really not changed since how I felt in the offseason. I don't necessarily mind the Suns not having a point guard in the starting lineup. I think it's difficult with the team that they constructed to find a way to put a point guard in that lineup without severely sacrificing size. And not to mention, although they weren't able to figure it out last year, you should do a better job at configuring an offense with those three offensive stars on your team. But it never made sense. It never made sense that they didn't have a backup point guard either. I really don't understand what they were thinking from that perspective. Now, Jordan Goodwin, I guess you could say, they maybe thought he would be better than he was, but I didn't. And I think it's fair if anyone else didn't.
And like Eric Gordon, I mean, this is the part that really gets me, man. Like you could sell me on this notion that we're going to have our big three in the starting lineup and we need it to work together. And that's fine. That's what they're trying to sell us on for next season too. But then to go to the bench and be like, okay, now it's not even Booker and Beal on the floor. Now we're going to bring Eric Gordon off the bench, and he's going to run pick and roll with Drew Eubanks. What was that? I mean, we didn't have a chance. We didn't have a chance with that particular configuration. There needed to be somewhere on the roster a guy who could just give you 15 or 20 minutes a game of pure point guard play. And yeah, like you said, maybe they thought that was going to be Jordan Goodwin. It was very clear within a week into the season that Jordan Goodwin couldn't be that guy. And then they were just stuck. They didn't have anyone else on the roster. They had to bring in Saban Lee at one point and kind of hope that he could speed them up a little bit in their half-court offense and do some of that stuff. So it was bad.
It got so bad that you were begging for him to play more. And I think you could even make the case that they could still even use another one on the roster if you really want to. Because if we're talking about a potential part of the season where Beal misses time and Booker misses time, if those two things overlap at all, and now you have Monte Morris playing 35 minutes a game and no other potential point guard to play behind him, and you're just begging David Roddy to drive and barrel into the lane as much as possible, that's tough. I think that's where Gillespie comes into play. Like, he could potentially actually make it onto the floor and play real minutes in that scenario because they just don't have other guys with that skill set. Grayson Allen, as much as he can do a lot of things well, passing was not a strong suit for him last year. He did have that one game where he had 11 assists just out of the blue, which was surprising, but it's not something he could do on a regular basis. And we've seen what it looks like when Damion Lee is forced to play point guard, because that has happened for this team with the amount of injuries they had in that 22 season. So we know what that's going to look like, and it's not great. So I think you could even make the case that they might even need another one as the season progresses. Not necessarily right now, but they do have one on the roster in Monte Morris. And I think to your point, it's good to have one that is, Chris Paul level when it comes to not turning the ball over. And everything else, not necessarily Chris Paul level. But at that one thing, yes, he is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, that's going to help them specifically. I think you could make the case that there's going to be times where Monte Morris has to close games out. Where they're just struggling to get the offense going. And in some ways, there might be a case or a scenario where there's a certain point of the season where it makes sense that he even starts with the big three. And I know that that's not going to be great defensively. I know that's going to be sacrificing a lot of size. But there might be a scenario where it makes the most sense to have a point guard in that starting lineup. Maybe they don't play a lot with them, but it might make sense to have somebody that's helpful in that scenario. It helps in this case that he's a pretty good shooter as well.
Absolutely. Suns fans should be relatively familiar with Monte Morris, I think, given that he played for the Denver Nuggets for several years. He was their starting point guard one year when Jamal Murray was out, but he was also their backup point guard for a few years. We played them in the playoffs. I guess we played Monte Morris in the playoffs multiple times. But just in case, I also want to point out, like, Monte Morris, as recently as about 18 months ago, this past season The reason we were able to get him for a veteran minimum is because he's coming off a quad injury that held him out for most of this past season, right? But the Monte Morris, who you're taking a gamble on here, the Monte Morris of 18 months ago was a starting caliber full-time point guard for the Washington Wizards, so granted not a good team, but he was a starting point guard 1 season ago who shot 48% from the field, 38% from three. He averaged 5.3 assists to 1 turnover per game, an absolutely sensational ratio, and he was doing this against starting caliber defenses every night in the NBA. And now, again, he had an injury last year. You're hoping to recapture some of that value that the Wizards got out of him a year ago. But we're seeing the Suns approach free agency with their 2 big signings so far in a very similar way, in that we know Mason Plumlee, we talked about this 2 days ago, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't heard it yet, but we know Mason Plumlee can start in a pinch because he's literally done it many, many times before. And if you go back 2 years ago with him, he was a full-time starting center for the Hornets as well. Same is true for Monte Morris. He might have been the worst starting point guard in the NBA that season with the Wizards, or among the worst. But if you're recapturing that value of what he was, then that still makes him probably the best backup point guard in the NBA going into next season. So his ability as a traditional point guard to really get the offense going, and the fact that you now have, I would say, 3 guys off the bench for the Suns, if we're assuming that the starting 5 is the same as last year, at least to begin, you've got options because you know that Mason Plumlee can step in and start for Nurkic if he has to. But then you've also got these 2 guys in both Monte Morris and Royce O'Neal where, let's say, Bradley Beal has to miss a game. Well, now you've got options, right? Like, you could start Booker at the 2 with Monte Morris and have a traditional, albeit like slightly undersized defensively, but you could have a traditional offense. Or you could say, let's run Book at the point, let's get more size in, and let's put in Royce and really focus on defense. And you can really start to mix and match against who your particular opponent is. But the only reason you can do that is because now you have 2 actual starting caliber guys on your bench between Morris and O'Neal, which is something the Suns just have not had in the past. Eric Gordon, for instance, last year, he might have been a guy who stepped into the starting lineup sometimes, but you obviously didn't believe in his two-way impact. I think Morris can survive a little bit more on the defensive end than Gordon ever could, and I think his offense, like, there's really no way to oversell it. I think he's going to have a massive effect on the Suns' offense. I've got some other stats I can read out here, but I think he's going to be big.
The overall bench now is interesting in that if you just think about Monte Morris, Royce O'Neal, Bol, Ryan Dunn, and Plumlee, those are all interesting and players, like good players that can play in good lineups as they go. But there's just zero scoring off that bench right now. There's nobody that can create shots. The only one that can really do it is Monte Morris at this point.
There's like one other guy.
He's going to have to carry. Who you're thinking?
Did you see my tweet yesterday about the Bol 6-Man of the Year campaign?
It might have to fall to him.
I was not
he
entirely.
Did
he re-signed, and we talked about that very briefly a couple days ago.
Yeah,
but I'm
happy about it though.
I think there's. I don't know what the Vegas odds are on 6-Man of the Year right now, and like probably Bol isn't going to play enough minutes to really qualify. Like, he might be like another 15, 18 minute per game guy as like the main backup power forward to KD or something, but I don't think he's going to be like a 30 minute per game true 6-man. But if you're talking about scoring options off the bench, Royce is there to hit threes and defend. Monte is not a scorer. He can play off the ball and he can shoot. I would also point out to people, actually, what's interesting about him, good mid-range shooter. I think we should, mention the fact that we have another good mid-range shooter now, Monte Morris.
I hope he never does it.
He shot 47% his fully healthy season with the Wizards.
That's pretty damn good. Yeah.
It's good. He shot 46% last year on a much smaller sample size because he only played 30 games due to injury, but he's a good mid-range shooter. In particular, watch out for him going left. Out of pick and roll, sometimes rejecting pick and roll specifically to go left and then pull up. He's really comfortable doing that. I watched a bunch of film on him doing that already. He's not a rim threat, right? So I wouldn't call Monte Morris a 3-way or 3-level scorer because like he doesn't have a ton of burst and he knows he's undersized. So I think he just doesn't go to the rim unless he like knows he's getting a layup guaranteed. But mid-range, his numbers are actually really good. And 3-point, he can hit threes. In fact, I'm sure Bud's going to be in his ear telling him to take more threes. But Bol, I think there's a chance right now. If you look at the Suns bench as currently assembled, he's going to be the guy who's maybe benefiting from Monte Morris's play the most. Because Plumlee's not going to, right? Like, Plumlee will catch the occasional lob, and Royce will get the occasional corner three. But, like, if anyone's going to be a scorer on that bench right now, honestly, I think it's going to be Bol.
I appreciate that we're in optimism season apparently, because I appreciate that you're excited about that.
Well, let me try.
It kind of terrifies me.
Let me try and do it to you with stats, okay?
Let me just paint one picture for you, and then I'll let you make the case. Kevin Durant misses 10 games, or Devin Booker misses 10 games, and now you have the entire offense is predicated on two players on the team that can create their own shots consistently. Now, there's not a lot of teams that have more than two players that can create their own shots, but usually the best teams do, right? They're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or if you're the Celtics, you play 7 or 8 guys that shoot over 40% from three. Like, there are ways to mitigate that if you find options to do that. But the fact that they really only have 3 guys, and all 3 of them in some ways have shown themselves to be slightly injury prone, it's a little bit scary in that there's not anyone from that bench that can step up and now score 20 points. Like, of course, Bol can do that a couple of times a season. How often he can do that? I'm guessing pretty rarely.
I think Monte.
That's just a little bit scary. They have
I don't think
problems
Monte
that they
is
might
going to
still
be
have to figure out how to solve.
Okay, a bunch of points to make on what you're saying. So one, I don't really think Eric Gordon was that guy last year anyway. He did it a couple times. I think Monte could do it.
Yeah, it was a problem last year too, though.
Yeah, so there you have it. We had a problem, and under those circumstances, we still had a problem. But the other thing I would say, we all know that this team goes as far as the big 3 goes. We just know that. And so, this is a problem that I've been having with some people's reactions online to these signings as well. It's like, if you don't believe in this big 3, then you're out on the team. That just has to be it. But don't hold that against the guy making $2 million. Like, there are people replying to the news that the Suns are bringing back Damion Lee, being sarcastically being like, "Oh, yay, this will change everything." Don't hold it against Damion Lee and his $2 million salary if you're out on the concept of KD, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker working together. We all know that this team goes as far as they go. And literally any team across the league, you take their 3 best players. If one of them misses half the season, then yeah, we're toast. Anyone would be toast in that situation, right? So we know those 3 have to work together. We know they have to be better, and we know they have to stay healthy. But that has no bearing on, or like, Monte Morris and Mason Plumlee have no bearing on that. They're going to do as well as they possibly can in their narrowly defined roles for the minimum contracts that they were signed for, right? We have to keep that in perspective and not expect those types of guys to come in and save this team. The saving comes from the top. A couple stats on Monte Morris, though. I just want to see if this gets you more excited. Okay? Turnovers, we're talking about what's the value. Will you let me cook for a minute? You don't mind?
Yeah.
I hope you don't have anything else to talk about. We're talking about the value of not turning the ball over, and we're talking about the value of a guy who is Chris Paul-esque in not turning the ball over. What does that do? Well, I already said Monte Morris doesn't have a lot of burst. I wouldn't describe this as like if you're expecting the Suns to play faster as a result of this signing, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think he can play in transition, but I just don't think the transition offense is going to get any particular boost for Monte Morris. Where all the real boost is going to be, the improvement, is in the half-court offense. And that's where the Suns ran into the most trouble last year, is you go into a half-court offense and the defense is set, and now they're sending 2 guys to the ball and you have to not turn it over. And the value of a guy who doesn't turn the ball over, you'd think that this would be hard to quantify. And of course, it's always hard to quantify or like isolate a single guy's impact on the court. But we have these stats, and there are stats that attempt to do precisely that. They attempt to isolate a single guy's impact on the court. So with Monte Morris, let's go back. Let's talk about the impact that he has had consistently on teams by not turning the ball over and what that does to their half-court offensive rating. If you go back to his last year with the Denver Nuggets, already a good team, had Nikola Jokic, had Jamal Murray healthy in that season, had Michael Porter Jr., all these guys. When Monte Morris was on the floor his last season in Denver, backing up Jamal Murray, Denver's half-court offense, their half-court offensive rating improved by 7.5 points per 100 possessions. 7.5. That's a big.
That's a lot.
That's a big difference. And this is a guy who's backing up Jamal Murray.
That's like Nurkic versus Eubanks. Yeah.
Yes. 1 year later, completely different team context, completely different players. The only changing variable really is Monte Morris. He goes to Washington. He's the starting point guard. The other point guards there are, I think they had Tyus Jones and DeLon Wright, also on that team. Two other guys who also don't turn the ball over. That season in Washington, when Monte Morris is on the floor, half-court offensive rating improved by 10.3 points per 100 possessions. Were they a good team? No. They had Bradley Beal and I think, did they have Kuzma that season? Right? Like they had some offensive weapons, but they didn't have a whole lot going for them overall. But when Monte Morris was on the floor, their half-court offense cooked. And of course, they were not turning the ball over. Last season is where it gets worse. But he only
was injured, right? Yeah.
Only played about a way smaller sample size. Sample size goes down all the way to like 400 minutes. Only played about 30 games. Had a lesser role in Minnesota. And the other thing I would say is Minnesota, he was backing up Mike Conley, who is another one of these types of point guards, just a great table setter. But even there in Minnesota, when he was on the floor in that small sample size, half-court offensive rating went up by a point. So it feels like everywhere he goes, he has this effect on a team's ability to execute in the half court just by virtue of never making mistakes. And I went already last season. He only had 69 assists all of last season because he didn't play that many games. But nice. You bet your ass I already watched all 69 of those assists. He's not a fancy passer, right? He's like that. This is how you average 5 assists to 1 turnover. It's not like you're doing, crazy like Jason Williams stuff or like, Nash dribbling your way all around, and like throwing passes behind your back. It's not that. It's you just have an incredibly tight dribble, a low center of gravity, and you're super conservative. But if it works, it works. And it seems to show in the numbers that his style of play works. It makes every half-court offense that he goes to, no matter the context, seems to be better because he's on the floor. As long as the defense holds up, that's really exciting. Right? Like that should be a really exciting prospect for Suns fans. His ability to mesh, I think, when you stagger him in minutes with certain other guys in the big three. This is what I'm talking about when I think he can have a big impact. And the last thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll shut up. But he's got chemistry already with half the fucking Suns rotation. He played that one season in Washington with Bradley Beal in the starting lineup. He played with Bol for 3 seasons in Denver. And he also played with Mason Plumlee when he played in Denver. So it's like he knows these guys already. It shouldn't take him long to figure out where Booker likes the ball, where KD likes the ball. Like this should be a natural, easy transition for him as a veteran.
I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that if you just think about the Suns last season with Devin Booker on the court versus with Devin Booker off the court, the offense was dramatically impacted by that. Let me look it up. Let's see. Devin Booker on the court, the offensive rating, 119.3. With Devin Booker off the court, 109.7. That's bad. Part of it was Devin Booker missed time. Like Kevin Durant played the whole time, so Kevin Durant had a large impact on that. And obviously, when Kevin Durant is playing, that's helpful when you have 2 of those guys versus, just one of those guys. But I think a big part of the offense tanking when Devin Booker was off the floor in the past was KD's not a point guard. He doesn't play like a point guard, and you shouldn't play him like one. Like, he shouldn't be on the ball running pick and rolls. You can do that occasionally, but it's nice when people are setting up guys, and including setting up him, catching it in his spots instead of starting at the top of the key and then working from those spots. And also, look, as much as they tried to turn Bradley Beal into a point guard, it was one of his worst seasons he's had in 10 years, right? Because it's not who he is. He can be a lot better than that if you allow him to be who he is. And both of those things can happen when Devin Booker comes out and Monte Morris comes in, now all of a sudden the offense is running the way you want it to run. They're finding guys in their spots. Royce is catching it open, or, if it was Eubanks, he didn't have a point guard. I think as bad as Eubanks was on defense, which did kind of sink the team, he would have been a much better contributor offensively, I think, if the Suns had Monte Morris last year. It would have just helped him a lot to have a guy that impacts the defense the way a point guard could. Because, sometimes Bradley Beal did that, but he wasn't finding guys with the passes the way a point guard could. As well, when Bradley Beal's on the ball, there's no Bradley Beal off the ball, which impacts guys as well, because Monte Morris is on the ball has its own gravity. Bradley Beal's moving off the ball, he has his own gravity. Now, those two things is what impacts the defense. That's what gets guys open at the rim. That's what gets guys open behind the three-point line. So the fact that we can potentially have Devin Booker coming off the court and still have a pretty good half-court offense is pretty exciting for me. And I said it at the time, I'm glad the Suns got Bol. I would have still kept Cam Payne last year, and Cam Payne actually had a pretty good year as far as what he played last year. He's not, he's about as good as Monte Morris probably on the aggregate. Not quite the same type of player, but overall probably would have had a pretty good impact on the Suns. But if not him, someone. They could have found another point guard another way. They didn't, and I almost feel like they kind of dug their heels in a little bit in a defiant way. And didn't get one because they could have looked for one at the deadline as well. And then maybe they did and they didn't find one, but they didn't get one. That's something they definitely didn't do.
Yeah.
And now here we are, and they signed a pretty good one. And I think it's going to benefit a lot of the other guys on the floor. And I think if you look at Monte Morris's stats at the end of the season, you're going to say, wow, he wasn't that great. 5 points, 5 assists or whatever, or 5 points, 4 assists at the end of the year. If that's what he averages, fine. But that still benefits guys a lot. He's not out there to score a lot. He's out there to set guys up. He's out there to get the ball down the court and get them into their offense a little bit quicker. Because you said he doesn't impact transition offense. I agree with that. But one thing he does do is if it's not Devin Booker and if it's not Bradley Beal dribbling the ball down half court, they're not guarding you full court. Right? They're going to let Monte Morris cross the half court at 20 seconds. Whereas they were trying to get Devin Booker as close to 17, 18 seconds as much as possible.
I mean, they're also just concerned with those guys. Like, they're trying to tire out Devin Booker throughout the course of a 48-minute game. So doesn't play. They're not worried about Monte Morris in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, we can talk more about Monte Morris if you want, but we can also just touch on Damion Lee real quick, and then I want to talk about the roster as a whole. Did you have anything else on Monte?
No. I'm really excited for Monte in particular. I think people will point at the 5 points, 4 assists last year or whatever. I think he's going to have a way better season than that. I think, admittedly, the Suns are taking a big gamble on two guys here in that Mason Plumlee, we talked about a couple days ago, he had the MCL sprain that kept him out for a lot of last season, and then Monte had this quad injury. And
Damion
both guys
Lee also tore his ACL off of the bone.
And Damion Lee tore his ACL. So it's like all three of these guys, for this to work, they need to be who they were 2 years ago and not who they were last year.
Get to where they were eventually, right? Yeah.
Right. But I can see the vision, right? It's a decidedly different vision than what they were doing last year, where they were doing the opposite of this, right? They were saying, Keita Bates-Diop, you've had one decent season. Yuta Watanabe, you've had one decent season. And you guys are like 25 years old. Let's see if that can progress into the next step. This time, they're taking the opposite approach, which is, hey, let's roll with some veterans. In Mason's case, he's past his prime. We can say it. But in the other two guys' case, you could argue they're in the primes of their careers. Monte's 29. He's not that old. And they're taking guys who have experience and saying, let's see if we can rekindle a little bit of this fire that you guys have lost that allowed us to sign you for minimum contracts in the first place. So it's a different strategy, and, there's always a risk, but we got to hope it pays off this time.
Damion Lee, look, you said it, and I think it's the most important thing. If he's healthy, if he plays like he did 2 years ago, that's just a good bench player. He was a great shooter. For most of the season, he was the best three-point shooter in the fourth quarter in the entire NBA. And guess what? Suns lost a lot of games in the fourth quarter last year. A lot. So if they have somebody like Damion Lee who could step in, is unfazed by that would be pretty helpful. I'm not sure if that's something that you could call a trend yet, because that was just one season where he was good at it. But it sure was helpful that season. And if that continues for him, that would be really helpful. But more than that, I think from everything we've heard from people around the Suns, he's a really positive presence in the locker room. He's somebody that likes to get on guys when they need to work a little harder. He's not afraid to call people out if they need to be called out. And there are guys like that are valuable to a team that don't even play. Udonis Haslem, for example, or Jared Dudley on the championship Lakers was another one. Those guys matter on teams, and they're valuable on teams, even as players. They're not considered coaches, but they kind of are. Although Damion Lee can, or hopefully can, actually play. I'm really happy he stayed because we talked about it with Kyle Lowry. We were hoping for somebody like Kyle Lowry to help be that leader, especially now that the Suns have some young guys on the roster as well. But you talked about it. Even the vets sometimes need guys like this. So Damion Lee returning, really happy about it. They need shooting, ultimately, if he can be a shooter still.
They need shooting, man.
They're desperate for that. So any other thoughts on Damion?
Well, just that shooting bit, and then we should talk more about the roster as a whole. But, the Suns were 25th in three-point volume last season. That's just not going to cut it. I don't think they need to be first. I think if you've got two mid-range killers like Devin Booker and KD, I understand you're never going to be first. But to me, with running Bud's system and all, they need to be at least league average in that stat to stand a chance at having enough of a modern offense that isn't just losing the math game basically every single game to other teams. So they were 25th in three-point volume last year, and they lost Eric Gordon, who took the fourth most total threes on the team. Those go to Damion Lee now, right? Like, those are Damion Lee's threes that he needs to fill in just to get them back to where they were last year, where, again, they were 25th. So if we want them to improve in that stat, a couple things need to happen. We need, other guys here in the rotation who are going to be soaking up minutes to take more than they did last year. Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, you need to be taking more than you did last year. Bol, another really interesting conversation for us to have about Bol, Mike, is like, what if Bol was the Brook Lopez all along? Like, I understand if he's not. I understand if he's not, but I think Bol shot 40% from three last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bud just went into training camp and said, "Okay, dude, your job is to chuck. Like, you're going to be that guy now. You're going to be Kevin Love now." I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. So yeah, a lot of guys need to make an improvement. But the other thing that can happen is that the Suns still have a roster spot left, and they can bring in some more help from the outside.
Or they can make trades. Let's talk. Okay, so on this, let's talk about the team. Guards. So I split these guys up into guards, wings, and bigs. Guards, you have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Monte Morris. I'm going to list Grayson Allen here because he plays both shooting guard and small forward on this team. Sometimes plays power forward, but he's a shooting guard, let's be honest. If he's playing at small forward, it's a guard playing at small forward. Damion Lee, too. Damion Lee is a shooting guard. I think ultimately he played a lot of small forward for the Suns. I think he's capable. It's not the worst case if he has to. Wings. Okay, let me just repeat the guards again. Beal, Book, Monte, Grayson, Damion Lee. Wings. KD,
all shooters, for the record.
Yeah,
I just want to
all
say
shooters, and I have them listed
that is a positive
sign
here. That all five of those guards are shooters.
Wings, KD, Royce O'Neal, Bol, Ryan Dunn, Nazir Little, David Roddy. And then you got bigs, Nurkic, Plumlee, Iguodaro. So, just think about the guys that you would consider shooters on this team. Beal, Book, Monte Morris, Damion Lee, KD, Royce O'Neal, Bol. Yep. Those are the shooters. Now,
so
Bol and KD are technically tall wings, right? They are.
Yes.
But Royce, Grayson. Oh, Grayson should be included in there too, I should say. Those are kind of guards playing forward. They're just so desperate for somebody taller that is a capable defender that can shoot right now. Now, none of the bigs that are currently on the Suns can shoot, right? Unless you count Bol as a big. He played power forward exclusively, basically, last year.
He played some center, but
yeah, it didn't go well. There's a reason that he played his best minutes at power forward.
He played maybe 100 minutes at center, and to your point, I actually did literally look this up today because I was curious. The Suns had a negative net rating when Bol Played center last year.
It didn't work.
So yeah. There's a reason they played
we watched it.
Power forward.
It didn't work. Yeah, it'd be great if they could figure it out. I mean, that would unlock a lot. Just to your point, Bol was that all along. If that could work. But it's a little tough to look at all these guys and see only KD and Bol as the guys over 6'5" who can shoot. Everyone else is 6'5" or under that can shoot on this team right now. Now you can say Royce is listed at 6'6" or Book is listed at 6'6". They're 6'5". They're 6'5". We can be honest with each other here. It's tough, especially I think after watching the finals, right, and seeing the Celtics have so many guys who can shoot, including guys over 7 feet tall who can shoot on that team. And even the Mavs, who have shooters across the board, they do play traditional centers on the Mavs for the most part, so you can work that in, and I think Luka benefits from that.
Yeah, but
consistently 4 shooters on the floor at all times who launch.
Exactly.
And,
there is there is no Ryan Dunn in that Mavs rotation, and we hope
it
Ryan
was Derek
Dunn
Jones Jr., right? He figured it out. He figured out how to shoot a little bit.
He figured out how to shoot. Maybe Ryan Dunn can do that in 2 or 3 years, but the expectation can't be that Ryan Dunn's going to be a shooter his rookie year.
But right now, let's point out the guys who can't shoot that are currently on the team, and it's really Ryan Dunn, Nazir Little, David Roddy are the big ones, and then all the bigs, right? Nurkic, Plumlee, Iguodala.
Mm-hmm.
Nazir Little and David Roddy. I look at this roster and I say these guys don't have a place on this team.
They're the
desperate to update those two guys with somebody taller who can shoot.
Yeah,
it's hard to find right now. We can go over who else is left on the free agency market in a little bit, but right now those two guys plus their open roster spot, which by the way might just be Josh Okogie. That's what we're hearing. Gerald Bourguet from PHNX is reporting that the Suns are trying to sign him to more than the minimum because they have the ability to do that. I think that's bad unless they have a plan. They can technically trade David Roddy and a second-round pick for Torrey Craig. I know it's funny, but they could do that, and that would make me feel a little better.
I can sense the anxiety in you right now. So let me try and talk you down a little bit. I believe Gerald's report. First of all, I think the Suns legitimately like what Josh brings, his energy, his hustle. Maybe he's a good role model to have. No.
I think you're right, but I think it's because of how little the other guys do what he does. It's not because he's so great that he could fit in on any team or anything like that.
Not on any team.
They have this glaring hole, and Josh Okogie's available, and he could potentially fill that, but he causes all these other problems. But
I know, Mike. But listen, okay. I think they've got tricks up their sleeve, and if they don't, you can retroactively make fun of me, and I will be...
Well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
So here's where I am. Right now, the signings the Suns have done so far, I'd probably give their summer an 8 out of 10, just based on so far. If they sign Josh Okogie to that last roster spot and don't do anything else, that grade is going to go significantly down. But I'm hoping that they still have a trick up their sleeve, particularly with... Keith Smith reporting tonight, for instance, and this is just speculation on his part, I think mostly, although he does hear chatter behind the scenes, that this next stage, now that the top free agents are off the board, this next stage is where teams before July 6th are really going to try and get active in a lot of these sign and trade agreements, and there are going to be a lot of 3-team trades and teams just trying to attach themselves to a better situation and, kind of these non-zero-sum game scenarios. I still think the Suns are probably active behind the scenes trying to get off. First of all, there's the whole Nurkic thing, which we talked about a couple days ago, too. They could still trade Nurkic. I still believe they're having those conversations about trading Nurkic. But even if they don't, even if he's too hard to move for a return that makes sense, they're out there talking to teams about both Nazir Little and David Roddy. And I think they're probably maybe trying to involve themselves in those 3-team discussions. Like, what if Utah trades Lauri Markkanen in the next handful of days, which it sounds like they're really serious about weighing proposals right now? You don't need to do anything big, but if you could just attach yourself to a bigger deal where either there's one team that just needs to fill a roster spot, give them David Roddy for nothing, a lightly protected second-round pick, or if there's a team that needs extra salary so that they can hit the salary floor, that's where Nazir Little and his $6 million becomes a little bit more useful, right? So
or Nurkic.
or Nurkic, right? But I'm talking about it doesn't have to be Nurkic, right? So to be clear, if they just bring in Josh Okogie and say, okay, everything's fine, to me, then I become significantly more pessimistic in my evaluation of that of this summer, because then you're staring down the barrel of, okay, we have Ryan Dunn and Josh Okogie and Nazir Little and David Roddy on the same team. This just doesn't make sense. We don't have enough shooters. I still believe there's a path where they're thinking about bringing back Josh Okogie to be like their 12th or 13th man, and they're still thinking about how can we create another roster spot, get off David Roddy or Nazir Little, and then either get a guy back in trade, or more likely they're looking at some other free agent options, because there are still other shooters out there. Some good guys got scooped up today. Taurean Prince, who signed with who did Taurean Prince sign with?
Milwaukee.
The Bucks. Yeah, he forgot that Bud's not in Milwaukee anymore, apparently. So Taurean Prince signed with Milwaukee. Joe Ingles is another guy who I thought about would be interesting, just to have a guy who can pass and shoot. He went to Minnesota today. But there are still other guys out there. Jetty Osman, he's a guy we've talked about. He can shoot the hell out of the ball. Doug McBuckets, as a longtime veteran, can't defend a traffic cone, but he can shoot.
He can really shoot.
He can really shoot, and he's out there. And there are other guys, too. There are free agents out. There are still many, many free agents. Dozens of solid NBA role players, at least, depending on your definition of solid, are still available in free agency as of today. And we're 3 days into free agency. So don't think that all of the options are gone. I have to believe that Matty Tellum is still out there. He's making the calls. He's trying to save this summer for us.
DJ Matty Tellum, yeah.
DJ Matty Tellum. And maybe the big Nurkic trade is still on the horizon, right? But I think, a little bit more likely would be, let's bring back Josh Okogie on a little bit more money so that maybe we can trade him in the future. And at the same time, let's attach ourselves to a 3 or 4 team trade somewhere, create a roster spot by getting rid of one of these guys who we don't really want anyway, and then bring in one more shooter on the wing. That, to me, if all of that stuff happens, then I feel good about standing pat on my current grade of, the Suns get like a 7, 8 out of 10 for this summer. A B plus. A B plus. Yeah. To change it to an A minus or A, I think you'd have to, hit a home run on a Nurkic trade or something. But right now, they're at a solid
B+. Get a big who can
me.
shoot, or something like that, right? Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I just don't... Look... There's ways to fix the shooting on this team outside of just signing shooters. Signing shooters helps a lot. But if Beal, Book, and KD all of a sudden just became high-volume three-point shooters that were launching every game, cool. It's not necessarily what you want out of them. If you're trying to fix the total amount of shooting that this team has, and now we're talking about attempts here, not just three-point shooting, because overall, they made a lot of threes last year as far as percentage goes. They just didn't shoot enough. So if you're trying to fix the attempts problem, you need to insulate specifically Book and KD with shooters at all times. They need to have as many as possible on the floor. Because if not, it falls on them. Now you want them to shoot a lot, which they should shoot more. But you also need them getting to different spots to leverage defenses against themselves and find open shooters that way. And if they're the only guys shooting, they become Jason Tatum of the last 3 years before this year, where he was surrounded by shooters. Where he was the one launching over and over again, and people were saying, why aren't you getting to the basket? Well, it's because you need someone to shoot. You need 3-point attempts. So it's just, I'm looking at the roster right now, and I'm begging. I'm begging for more shooting. Please, God, find more shooting. This team, as it stands, cannot sustain long stretches with any of these shooters missing time. They don't have enough shooting. Now, if all of a sudden they become a top 5 defense because of Ryan Dunn or Plumlee, I don't know who else is going to make this difference. But if that happens, okay, maybe you can get away with it a little more. That pushes your overall
Monte Morris, arguably, bro, because I'm telling you, the best defense is a good offense, and if they never turn the ball over anymore, their transition defense is going to be number 1 all of a sudden. Monte Morris is going to Monte Morris might be the MVP of this team next season. There's your headline for this episode.
Yeah.
He really might be, dude. He might change everything.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to... Look, I will say this. The Suns, in the last few off seasons, have made trades that were late in the off season. Sometimes all the way up, like the DeAndre Ayton trade last year, all the way up until like a few weeks before the season started. They're not afraid to do that. They will continue to negotiate as late as possible, and it's possible the roster won't be done for another month and a half.
Not to mention, not that you would ever want to trade him if you're talking about fixing the shooting issue, but Grayson Allen, who we've talked about as another potential trade piece, he's not even eligible to be traded until October, right? So if they wanted to make those sorts of bigger thinking moves, the only big contract they have to move right now is Nurkic. But this is the other thing I wanted to say to you, dude. James Jones and Mike Budenholzer. You know that they're not going to go into the roster feeling that it's fully completed with this absolute lack of shooting on the roster. They're just not, given what we know about those two guys. I cannot, in good faith, with everything we know about them, believe that they view this roster as a completed product. And if, it's 4 months from now and we're going into the regular season and it appears that this is the final roster, then you can come back and clip me on this episode and make fun of me for how wrong I was. But we know who James Jones is. It's just not going to happen. This guy, all he did in his career was shoot corner threes. He values having a corner three-point shooter somewhere on this roster.
I agree that he wants this. I think that the gun is running out of bullets a little bit, though, in them trying to find that last shot that they're going to take. So, they just have a lot of limitations on them. They have that 2031 pick.
He wants Corey Kispert, I can tell you right now. He might end up settling for...
Does he make less than Nazir Little? Yeah, I don't
know
if he does.
He does. Yes, he's trade eligible, and he's like one of the best three-point shooters in the league. I'm telling you right now, James Jones wants Corey Kispert. He's playing hardball, and eventually he might have to relent and get Doug McDermott.
Well, now Evan Sidery is going to put that in a tweet. Thanks.
Okay,
so
go
we'll
ahead.
see that
go
tomorrow
ahead,
on Twitter. That's not a report. Any other free agency signings? We can keep this one short because we've done a lot of podcasts in the recent few weeks. So, any other signings? We talked about Taurean Prince. We talked about Joe Ingles. Your best friend Alec Burks going to the Miami Heat. Were you disappointed in that? I don't know.
Are they still the favorites for DeMar? Is that going to happen? Because that's kind of
interesting. There's rumors. Yeah, there's rumors. Kyle Anderson going to the Warriors. I don't know if that stood out to you in any way. It's not a huge move. But
I'm realizing I'm not up to date enough because who else went to the Warriors today? Someone else did besides Kyle Anderson.
DeAnthony Melton was yesterday. Yeah. I don't think they have any
Okay,
other
no, it was just
players.
those two guys. Yeah. It was just those two guys.
LeBron James signed an extension for as late as he could sign it, so it's just, I don't think that's really significant, although he does have a no-trade clause now. So now there's two players in the NBA. Buddy Hield was potentially going to the Warriors. That was the other one.
Yes,
that was not done yet, I think.
That's the other one that I saw. Yeah, I mean, look, if they get Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton... And honestly, you know how I feel about Klay Thompson. Like, I'm not that high on Klay Thompson in the first place. I don't view the Warriors as being anywhere close to the top tier in the West right now, right? So
but they might have gotten better. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a case to be made. It really all falls on Melton's shoulders because he, when he is fully healthy, is a hell of a role player and was just not good last season. So he needs to get back to who he was in order for that to work. But yeah, there's potentially something there. Did anything else happen that was interesting in the last 24 hours? This free agency period
really.
is moving.
I just went through all of Woj and Sham's tweets. I didn't see
moving so slowly, man. Yeah. And then you look at the list of guys who are still available, and it's like, let's just read out some names. Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. That's a good place to end here. Lowry.
Here's some good guys who are still out on the market. Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Buddy Hield, we don't know yet. Gary Trent Jr., Markelle Fultz, Tyus Jones, Luke Kennard, Talen Horton-Tucker, Jetty Osman, not really. I'm going down. This is in order of salary
Talen
last year.
Tucker, that's interesting.
So I have to pull out.
Not a shooter as well, but yeah.
Pull out some guys now who are on smaller salaries. Caleb Martin, Sadiq Bey, Jay Crowder. That's an interesting one. I saw he liked someone's tweet about coming back to the Suns. I still say fuck him, but
Yeah. I'd be fine with it. I feel differently, but yeah.
Precious Achua. A former Sun named Dario Saric is out there. These are NBA players. Like all those guys I listed, look, I know. They're not
a lot of them are probably going to be minimum contract guys.
Most of them aren't starters anymore, but like you can field a decent collection of actual role players out of that list, right? And there's a lot of these guys still available. So we're moving really slowly here and we got to see how it all shakes out.
We're going to be around to cover it. We might be Monday, right? I guess you're going to have your podcast equipment with you if something major goes down over the next few days. Otherwise, we're going to let it all shake out over the next few days, and we'll be back probably. Look, it's the 4th of July. If you're a Suns fan, have a good weekend, right? Take some time off, chill, and then we'll be back to cover it. If a big trade or anything happens, we'll be ready to cover it. If it's one more minimum signing, I think we'll wait probably till the weekend is over to record another podcast. But it's been a fun few weeks for us, Sam. Very, very busy. We had 5 podcasts over the last 2 weeks, and six and a half hours on playback as well. I think we had a lot of time with talking. I was on the radio this morning. Just a lot busy. And you were on the radio last week. So it's been a very busy few weeks for us. But thank you everyone for listening. Take the weekend off. Have a good 4th of July. We appreciate you all, and we'll be back after the weekend.